Welcome, J-Nights, to episode 10 of the What the Austen podcast. I'm joined by Martha from Martha Bethman Reads. So hi, Martha. I'm so glad to have you with me today. Martha is a bookstagrammer who I met over on Instagram through my page, and she started the hashtag Make Your Shelves Inclusive. And also she is the host of Regency Readers, which is a book club. Martha is honestly one of the biggest readers that I know. She gets through so many books a month. It's so impressive. So yeah, and I also love your little dance parties on your stories. But yeah, I'll pass over to you and let you say a little bit more about your page.
Yes, hello. So I love running my bookstagram. It's so fun. I started it in March, literally a couple of weeks before lockdown. I'd been kind of like stalking bookstagram for a while and like following bookstagrammers, but then I was like, oh, you know what, I'm going to go for it. I think it'll be really fun. It'll be a great way to meet people. So I did. So I kind of was there slightly before lockdown, and then in lockdown so many people made bookstagrams because people had more time and were reading more, and it was so fun, and I've met so many amazing friends on there, and I just love it. And then my Make Your Shelves Inclusive I started after George Floyd's killing and all of the conversations that were happening about race, and I realized that I wasn't making a conscious effort to read inclusively and diversely, and I really wanted to change that. So I started posting and recommending books, and then did a couple readathons that people could do with different prompts for different ideas, like romance book by a Black author and things like that, just to kind of not tick boxes as such, because that's not the purpose. The point is to kind of think more about what you're reading and be a bit more conscious with reading other people's stories and other people's perspectives. And I've done a couple readathons since then. And then I was running a book club, which I'm going to try and relaunch, which is really low key. It's not like you have to be a proper member for the Make Your Shelves Inclusive book club. I kind of get people to vote on a book and then invite people to the buddy read if they're interested. So yeah, it's kind of casual.
I love that. No, absolutely. And to be honest with you, like I've had so many great recommendations from you, like seeing your posts and your stories from the hashtag. So I definitely recommend following Martha to keep up to date with that. And yeah, it's just great. Like you said, you know, it's good to be more inclusive of your reading, because I think sometimes it needs to be a conscious effort, because you don't realize that actually maybe what's on the shelf is maybe dominated by white authors, or maybe your own shelf is and you don't even realize. So I think it's really great that you started that hashtag. So how did you get into Austen originally?
So I got into Austen through my mum and Colin Firth. So my mum is a massive Colin Firth fan. She always says that if he turned up tomorrow and said, will you marry me? She'd leave and she'd be gone with Colin Firth. So she got me to watch the 1995 Pride and Prejudice when I was 8. And I have vague memories of watching it. And I remember being like, oh, Wickham, he's so nice. And then being like, oh my God, what just happened?
Oh my gosh.
I hadn't read the books or anything. And obviously my mum was like, I'm not saying anything. So it started from that. And I fell in love. I just loved it. I just think that adaptation it's my favorite as well. And we had it on video.
Yeah, we had it on video as well.
Massive box set with the videos in.
And it was split into 2, wasn't it? 2 videos. Yeah, it was massive.
So basically through my mum, she loves Austen. She likes reading. She's not as much of a reader as me, but she does enjoy reading, and she was always really encouraging for me to read. So yeah, Colin Firth.
Honestly, the amount of guests that I've asked, how did you get into Austen? It's always my mum and Colin Firth. Like, it's so true. Thank God for mums drawing us into that 95 adaptation. Thank goodness. But yeah, I did have that video set as well. That's so funny. I can't believe how big it is. I actually think my mum still got it, like the one that we had.
Yeah, we probably still do as well at home somewhere. Yeah, and then I think my grandma got me the book that year. And I mean, at 8 years old, I could not get through Pride and Prejudice. I was quite a strong reader, but it was new for me in terms of like reading classics. So I think I probably first read it when I was like 10 or 11. And then I like watched all the adaptations and I just love it. I'm also very, very lucky that I live in Hampshire. So Jane Austen's house is like 40 minutes up the road, and I go like once or twice a year. And I started going with my family when I was younger, and now I'll like drag everyone there.
Oh my gosh, I love that. That's actually amazing. So I've literally well, recently I've moved back down south, so I am closer to Jane Austen's house. I used to live closer to Mr. Darcy's house, both of them, both in both adaptations. But now I've moved closer to Jane's house. I have visited before, but I'm glad that I'm going to be closer to you, so I can go a bit more regular. That would be nice. But considering you grew up there, it's incredible. Oh my gosh, we'll have to go together.
Yeah. So I always wanted to go as a kid, and then we'd never we'd never been there, and then we were visiting family and we drove past it on the way. My mum was like, on the way back we'll go, and then we used to go all the time. So we went once on Jane's birthday, 16th of December, and it was free entry that day, and they had carols in the entrance hall, and it was so lovely. So that was really fun. That was with my mum.
That sounds amazing. I actually love that. I'd love to take my mum. Hopefully she'll come and visit, and then we can both go. But yeah, that's great. So today's episode, we're going to be discussing Bridgerton. Last year, Netflix released season 1 of the show, which is based on Julia Quinns' 8-part romance series of the same name. It was hugely popular, and so they've actually announced that they're going to do season 2, which will be coming out this year. So yeah, we don't have a release date as of recording this episode, but I'm sure it will be. They've said it's definitely going to be 2022, so at some point in that time, I'm sure. But if you've not read the first book, you've not seen the Netflix series yet, I'd recommend watching or reading that before you listen to this episode. There are going to be a lot of spoilers, and we're not really going to do a summary as such, because there's so many subplots and plots in Bridgerton that I think it'd just take us the whole episode just to do a summary. So yeah, I really recommend catching up on it before you listen to this episode, and then yeah, come and join us then and we can go through it. So Martha, I'd love to hear about, what your first thoughts of Bridgerton. Did you read the books before the series came out, or did you get into it because you watched the first season?
No, so someone I follow on Instagram, one of my Bookstagram friends, Olive, from Olive Loves Books, was reading the series and was really excited when they said that the show was coming. And I was like, oh, I really want to read the books. Like, I'm quite a big romance reader. I think on Bookstagram, I'm known for reading a lot of romance and a lot of classics, 2 very different types of genres. True. But I also love classic romances like Austen. And I love period dramas. So I was really, really excited. And I watched the season very quickly and was like, oh, I immediately need to read the books. So I downloaded the first one on my Kindle, and then just started reading them from there, and conveniently finished the 8th one last week.
Amazing.
So I've been reading them since last December. Well, yeah, so since December 2020, I've been like kind of spreading them out. They're such comfort reads. I was like waiting for the perfect time to read the next one.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the show itself is such a comfort watch. I wasn't sure when I first saw the trailer, I was thinking, oh gosh, is this going to be like a super mainstream version of Austen? Am I going to hate it? But honestly, as soon as I watched the first episode, I was absolutely hooked. I was like, oh my gosh, I love it so much. I did make the mistake of watching like 1 or 2 episodes, then going to my mum and going, oh my gosh, you've got to watch this show and watch Bridgerton. Then get into like 3 or 4 episodes in and seeing all the sex and being like, I can't believe I recommended this to my mother. Oh my God. So I'm just grateful I didn't watch it.
They were both watching it. They were like, which episode are you on? I was living at home then still. I moved in the summer. But I was living at home then, and I did not watch it with them. I very much watched it on my own.
I've heard horror stories of people watching it with their parents. I'm glad I wasn't in that boat. But mom would be like, which episode you're on? Like, what's happened? I'm like, I don't want to discuss what's happened anymore.
Oh no, I really, really enjoyed the show. And I think it was kind of for me, it was quite exciting for people to get to watch something Regency and seeing that it's not all stuffy. Because I think sometimes there's these preconceptions about Austen and Regency, and it's very much not Austen, but that kind of era, and it kind of added the glamour and like the fun elements.
It's so true. It was really interesting to see so many people get into Regency, and we're all here like, hello, we've been here for ages, but welcome to the community.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that people have this idea about classics that they're really hard. And I'm not saying that they're not. I've read some classics that have taken me a long time, but I enjoy them and I get a lot out of them. But I think sometimes people that find Austen boring don't get her. Like, she's so funny and she's so rude and she's actually quite mean. And some of her letters are hilarious. The things she writes about people, like, no wonder Cassandra had to burn some. Like, oh my God, I dread to think what was in the burnt letters. And I think that it kind of captured the fun of the era that you don't always see.
Yeah, what I really loved about it is I think in the same way that Austen makes fun of her own characters, Bridgerton makes fun of itself in so many ways. I feel like it laughs about how ridiculous the marriage market is, and the costumes are so extreme. It's almost like a caricature of itself. And I just think that's brilliant. Like, I feel like that captures Regency England and, like you said, Jane Austen's style. It's not all serious.
Yeah, and I really like that about it. And I think also, like, the show is not Austen fan fiction or anything like that, because actually they're not gentry. They're very much lords and ladies and dukes and duchesses that Austen wouldn't really have experienced much of. So I quite like that it adds like another layer to the era that I've not read as much about, even if it is obviously fictional. But
no, I totally agree. I literally thought the same as well. And also, even though we do get some moments of being in London through Austen's work, Bridgerton is completely set in London, which is, well, mostly is completely set in London, which is amazing because usually, like, what we've been introduced to is like Bath, the countryside, but it's amazing to see what it was like. Well, obviously it is fictional, but it's amazing to see things from like what it'd be like in London, in like all the parties, and like you said, them having more money, because a lot of like our heroines or our storylines in Jane Austen, it comes from a place of struggle. These aren't really rich people. Yeah, they may be gentry, but they're not on this level of lords and ladies, like you were saying. The people in Bridgerton have a lot of money, a lot of power. I think it just opens a new door up. I think something that was maybe like controversial, a lot of people get the knickers in a twist about, is that it isn't historically accurate. For me personally, I don't mind that. I love the magic of it that it isn't. Like, I feel like it's got the essence of Regency England, but it's 100% isn't meant to be historically accurate. It's just got that sense of the era.
I don't think that it professes to be. Like, from reading the books, she's not writing as if this is accurate historical fiction of Regency. It's a romance series set in Regency England. There is elements that will be of the time, and then she's added a lot of things to make it fun and entertaining, and I really like that. Like, I do enjoy historical fiction as a genre, but I'm not always like everything I read has to be completely accurate to the time. And I think with the show, they made it so modern. Like, they kind of really brought, like, I love period dramas anyway, but some people, there's kind of a preconception of them where it's like, oh, they're really boring and stuffy and nothing happens. So they kind of brought period dramas to the wider public and made it really fun.
Right, absolutely. Like, one of a really good example is the music. The fact that they took kind of modern music and it was just in like a classical genre, which I thought was amazing. Like, I absolutely love that. And like you said, that draws more people in, having things like that, making sure that the costumes are much more visually stimulating, and the scenery, like, all of it is bright and colorful. And there's just like, I mean, I love it, honestly. And I think by not professing to be accurate historically, that's then opened the door for other things, such as race and diversity. And there's a lot of sex in the show, which that doesn't bother me in Bridgerton at all. Like, it's absolutely meant to be there. It's basically what the majority of the plot is based around. It does bother me when they put it in Austen. They kind of like shoehorn it into an Austen adaptation. I'm just like, that doesn't really fit, because Austen stuff's more about the stolen glances in the letters that change someone's perception of somebody else, or the conversations in private, that kind of thing. I think the way that they write it, you're right, it makes it so appealing to a modern audience.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I agree with the whole, like, it being the right place for sex in Regency to be, because it's a romance series. That's what it's about. It's about people falling in love. And I was thinking earlier how different it is with the way they fall in love. Like, I was trying to think if I could compare any of the couples with any of the Austen couples in how they get together, but it's really hard to, because a lot of the time, not in all of the books, but in quite a few of the books, it's very much, this has happened, you're going to be ruined if you don't marry, so you're going to have a quick wedding, and obviously you've either already fallen in love or you're going to fall in love. Whereas you don't really see that in Austen. But I think that, I mean, I'm not a Regency expert historically, but I think that the upper classes had a lot more going on with those sorts of things than kind of Jane Austen's, because if she was ruined, she didn't have a dowry in the same way, she wouldn't have been married, and her characters, like, you see what happens to Colonel Brandon, the woman that he loves, who gets ruined, and then again what happens to is it Eliza, his like ward?
Yeah, Eliza, yeah, it's so bad, yeah, for her. But yeah, like you said, because they're not wealthy,
yeah, they can't like rush a wedding through and then have them like happily married. So I think that's the big difference. I think class comes into it a lot.
Yeah, yeah, no, I absolutely agree, 100%. Because there's a place for sex, there's also a place to celebrate kind of female pleasure in that as well. I think Bridgerton does that really well, and I think Outlander does that really well as well. And I think that's super important. And again, that's speaking to a modern audience, because I doubt that was a conversation probably too much of the time. So I think that's done really well. What I would say, there was a lot of controversy, and I believe that there should be controversy around this, and that's kind of the rape scene, the non-consensual, unprotected sex between Simon and Daphne.
Yeah, so I had been pre-warned about that and was intrigued to see how they did it in the show. Reading the book, it's worse in the book.
Oh,
so
really?
The first book was my least favorite. Up until that point, I was like, oh my God, this is going to be a 5-star read. I'm loving it. And then that happened and I just felt really, really uncomfortable. So I always say to people, like, if you read the first book and you don't like it, but you liked it until then, read the others, because they're not like that at all. There's none of that. And the female pleasure thing is in every book. You kind of see the women like coming into their own and kind of realizing these things. And I really like that about Bridgerton. It's not all about the men. And yeah, I think that's a really important part of it, and like the message it gives out. But yeah, I really struggled with that scene in the book. It like really made me uncomfortable.
Yeah, and I really struggled with the show, how it kind of just brushes over it, like that's not really wrong. Like it made out as if that was on par with him lying about like the fact that he couldn't have children as opposed to not wanting children. But I just thought the way that they maybe handled that wasn't right, because I was like, that's actually really shocking, because even if he just didn't want children, that's still okay, that's still his choice at the end of the day. So I was a little bit like, that kind of threw me slightly, and I know there was a lot of controversy around that.
Yeah, I was quite surprised, having read it in the book, that they even kept it in for the show. I'm not saying that they should water it down, but you could have still had the same arguments and drama and them separating without that scene. You could have just had that she finds out and goes mad and he runs off. I don't know if it was necessary to include it, but then I guess otherwise you're kind of painting over what happens in the book, and people would then have an even bigger shock when they read the books. So I don't know. I mean, it's hard, isn't it, to know whether to include things that were in the source text.
Yeah, so true. And then it's hard to how you do address that without completely overshadowing the rest of the storyline as well. So agreed. It's definitely a difficult one. So yeah, I think something else which is both being celebrated and sometimes criticized for not going far enough, and that's the diversity in the show. And I think there are definitely some incredible Black actors in Bridgerton, and some wonderful, powerful female characters like Lady Danbury and the Queen, for instance, which is really great to see. I think they were definitely missing including a Black, young, elegant, feminine kind of female character, more like a Daphne. So I think season 2 is going to rectify this from the trailer. It does look that way. But I did see a lot of outreach for them to take diversity further, and I think they really should. There are some really great videos, both by The World According to Chyna and The Feminine Fancy, that I really recommend watching, which highlight this. And they say, where is my representation as a young, strong, feminine Black woman? So, yeah, I'll leave links for both of those videos below, because I definitely recommend checking those out. Martha, your thoughts on this?
I do. I think I agree with you. I think they could go further, but it's not in the books. So I really like that they've made that an addition, and I quite like that it's not just that there's like Black actors. They have conversations about it. Like Lady Danbury and Simon have a conversation in the series where she's like, we have to do even more than everyone else. Like we have to be better than everyone else because people judge us. And I really like that they didn't just cast people, they kind of made a statement. I agree, it could have gone a lot further, but I think it's nice to kind of have that in there. And I think also it is historically accurate. Like in Sanditon, which obviously is Austen's unfinished novel, which makes me sad. I would love to see how it panned out. But one of the characters in that is an heiress from the West Indies.
Miss
so
Lam,
it's nice to see that representation, even if they could do more. And hopefully season 2, there will be more. Fingers crossed.
Do you want to get into a bit of character analysis and comparison? Do you have a favorite character in the series?
Yes, Penelope.
She's
Penelope
awesome.
and Lady Danbury are my two favorites. And the saddest thing about getting to the later books is that you don't often see some of the earlier characters. They get mentioned and they sometimes pop up, but I do love romance series that feature on different characters that you've met and then you kind of learn more about them. But Penelope is my favorite character. And I love when she pops up in the books and in the season. I think she's great. She's so subversive as well. Like there she is, she's so quiet. Her sisters mock her for her weight and her mum puts her in horrendous dresses. And then the whole time she's the puppeteer. She's playing everyone and she's just got all the power. And I just think she's great.
I know, I absolutely love that myself as well. And I'm just so glad that she does kind of have one up on everyone, because like you said, like she is just kind of pushed to the sidelines all the time by a lot of the other characters. And also I feel bad for her because obviously she's got feelings for Colin and he just sees her as a friend. But again,
I see those two as like a reverse Emma and Knightley.
Yes.
But like that's like the best comparison I could come up with Austen characters. I feel like she's the Knightley and he's the Emma, and he's very much like happy, like doing his own thing. And then Penelope's like, but I love you.
I know. Yes, so true. That's actually such a good comparison. Oh yeah, an interesting character to talk about would be the Queen. They focus on her, like despite the fact that they're like the king's going mad and what have you. He's very much in the background, and the Queen is kind of the powerhouse of the couple. She's like holding it all together, and I think she's just a really great character.
Yeah, I hope that they bring her back in the other seasons and we see more of her, because I did find her really interesting. And it's like she kind of sets off Daphne's story in like the first episode where they go and get presented at court and she is like named as like Diamond of the First Water. So she's a really like central character for that. And then obviously they get invited there. And I think that it's hinted quite a lot that Lady Danbury is like, well, you see that Lady Danbury is actually quite close with the Queen. She has that sort of power and control. So it's nice to see kind of both those characters, especially because they're both Black actresses. It's nice to see them in like positions of power.
Yeah. I mean, and also that friendship, them supporting one another.
Yeah, they're really supportive and I really like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. Do you know what Lady Danbury's story is? Does that come out later? Because obviously we just see her as in the position of being kind of like this fairy godmother to Simon and supporting him through life. But I was just curious, like, what is her story and how did she get into her position?
So you don't I don't remember learning like loads about her, but she's in a lot of the books, I think, because she's a fan favorite. And I think she's such a great character. So she has a really strong friendship with Penelope in Penelope's book, which is the fourth one, Romancing Mr. Bridgerton. And I loved that. And then they both pop up together in other books. So Hyacinth, which is the youngest sibling, who again you don't see tons of in the show, but she's there as a child. Her book is about a romance with Gareth St. Clair, who is Lady Danbury's grandson. So she's in that one so much, and Hyacinth and her have such a great relationship, and they're both like really strong and really funny. And like Lady Danbury's quite old at this point, and she goes and reads to her, and it's just brilliant. So I just love when she pops up in the books because she's just a great character.
Yeah, she definitely is. She's a really good character in this show, and again, somebody who really helps to push the plot forward. So those people are always super handy for sure. You need those people.
Doesn't stand for any nonsense. Like she knows what she wants and she will go for it. And I like when her and Violet like pair up to try and match make people. It's so entertaining to watch.
Yeah, I totally agree. That's so funny. And I love how she's always like saying to Simon, she's like, you need to get your act together because like this woman's not going to be waiting around for you. You need to sort yourself out. And if you're not going to, let her marry the prince. I'm glad she didn't marry the prince. But I think some people were disappointed that she did end up with Simon, which is interesting, to be honest with you. I think I did see similarities between Simon and Daphne and Elizabeth and Darcy. Like I feel like they really made Simon that kind of I don't think he's necessarily comes across as proud, but he's definitely like quiet, and he knows that he is obviously he's got like status and title and everything, and he's got a lot of confidence, which obviously has come with time because when he was younger he didn't have the confidence. But I think, and also that they're meeting when Daphne and Simon meet, and it's kind of like confrontational, and they're just like, she's like, what is your name? And like she genuinely doesn't know, and they're kind of a little bit rude to each other. That also reminds me of when Elizabeth meets Darcy, and he's obviously pretty rude, and then he says the thing about not wanting to dance with her. So,
he does not give a good first impression, does he? And Simon doesn't either. And then I think what's really interesting is I was when I was like thinking about all the male characters in the Bridgerton books, apart from I don't think Gregory as much, which is the youngest brother, so you don't really see him in the season. Like he's the one that's like arguing with the little sister, and they're like throwing peas at each other at the dinner table. But the books go on quite far, so you get to his story in the books. But like all of the men are rogues. Like they've all slept with loads of women, and they're not ready to settle down. And you definitely don't get that vibe from Austen's heroes, but you definitely get that vibe from the villains. Henry Crawford would definitely be out there sleeping around. I mean, he does in the book anyway, in Mansfield Park. But she doesn't, I would highly doubt that someone like Mr. Darcy wouldn't have slept with anyone before Elizabeth. But Austen doesn't hint at that because it's just not, it's not how it's done.
No, exactly. And I think she puts the heroes on such high pedestals, whereas in Bridgerton, they're very much flawed. Like the male characters are flawed. Like you said, most of them are rakes. They're all running around gambling and sleeping with people. And I kind of like that about this, that they are more rounded. And I quite enjoy the fact that we get to see Simon's past and how he kind of gets to being the person that he is. I think that's super interesting because we don't get that a lot with Austen's heroes either. We don't really see how they progressed into the people that they are today. But you were so right. They are more like the villains in Austen because we see their flaws.
And they come across that way in quite a lot of the books. The women are like, oh God, stay away from you. And Benedict actually in book 3, he like his love interest, it's like a Cinderella type story. And she's illegitimate. And he like has an affair with her the whole way through, and he's like, oh well, I can't marry you. And you're like, oh my Benedict, this is not cool.
Oh my gosh, no, that's so bad. Oh my
It does
goodness.
work out well. It's a romance novel. There's always a happy ending. But at the time I was like, hello, Willoughby.
Oh yeah, I will be. That's so funny. Oh my gosh, that's so bad though. Parts that I do like, and I find similar between kind of Daphne and Elizabeth. One, the fact that she punches Nigel, I'm sorry, but that is one of the best scenes ever when he like makes advances on her in the garden and she just punches him one. Honestly, love that scene. But I think she is quite strong-willed. I'd say maybe one of the differences is even though Daphne wants to marry for love and Elizabeth wants to marry for love, I feel like Elizabeth isn't that bothered. Like it's not, I don't think it's like on her mind really. Like she does make comments, like she says, she jokes about it. Like I don't think she doesn't look at it in a serious sense, and which is why she obviously falls out with Charlotte, because she can't understand why Charlotte would make a practical choice for marriage. Whereas Daphne, like she has sleepless nights about marrying. Like it's very much like she needs to sort it. It's her biggest worry in life. She even says that to Anthony when they're out riding. She says, like, you can't understand what it's like from my position. Like, this is what I've been bred for.
And I think that in that sense, she's probably more like Jane, as in not Jane Austen, but Jane Bennet. Like Elizabeth's the second youngest. Elizabeth's kind of in that sense more like Eloise, where she's like, well, it's not my time. I'm not the oldest. My sister is the oldest. She has to like marry for the family. And Lizzie's very much, she won't do what she doesn't want to do. And Daphne's the same. She wouldn't marry someone that she didn't care about. But I think as the oldest, she has a lot more pressure than her younger sisters. And you definitely see that. So actually, Eloise in the books, she marries a lot later. And she kind of, once Penelope gets married, she's like, oh, I'm left on the shelf. Must do something about this. And then she starts her romantic story. And I think she is about 27. So she's kind of like, I don't want to compare her to Charlotte, but she's kind of quite happy being herself until everyone else around her's coupled up. And then she's like, oh, this is a bit boring now. I'm going to go find love.
Oh,
so I quite like that because you saw a slightly older bride.
Yeah, I like that as well. Yeah, that's a really good point. I think you're right. Like Eloise does really share a lot of characteristics with Elizabeth, that's for sure. But yeah, I think you're right as well. I think Jane and Daphne share a lot of characteristics, although Daphne is a little bit more outspoken than Jane is. Oh yeah, an interesting character to talk about would be Miss Maria Thompson.
Yeah, so she's an addition.
So she's not in the books.
So I'm not sure so in Eloise's book, the guy that she like goes to meet, who she's been writing to, I feel like his name's Sir Philip. His wife has died, and her name is Marina, and she's like a distant cousin of the Bridgertons. So I don't know if they kind of. And the plan that Marina suffers with her mental health, and she suffers with depression, and stuff more gets revealed throughout the book. But she was due to marry Philip's brother, and he died at war, which is kind of Marina's plot that you find out later on. So I think they kind of co-opted that and put it in there, but I'm not sure how they're going to use it if they get to Eloise's story in the show. So she's not completely fictional, but they kind of moved her timeline around.
And kind of slightly changed her storyline as well. Yeah. Because she plays quite a big role in what Whistledown announces, because obviously Whistledown's Penelope and Marina Thompson is trying to seduce Colin so that he has sex with her so that they can have to marry, and so that she can kind of hide this pregnancy from a man who's gone off to war, etc. I really didn't like her. Honestly, I don't know if it's because I liked Colin or because I just didn't like the deception of it, but it just really bothered me.
I really for Penelope as well. Like, she's so good to Marina when she comes, and it's so obvious that Penelope's in love with Colin. Anyone could see it, and Marina just uses that to learn about Colin and then try and seduce him. And it just made me really sad because Penelope she's just lovely. I know she's obviously, we find out at the end that she's Lady Whistledown, which in the books you don't learn till her book in book 4. So I'm really intrigued to see if they get to her story and how they do it. because the reveal's been done.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's not been revealed to everyone. It's just been revealed to us as the audience. So there's still a lot of mystery around that for the rest of the characters, which is really cool. And I'm interested to see how that plays out. But yeah, I struggled with Marina. Initially, I liked her. And then when she started manipulating Penelope, I was like, nah, she's my girl. I'm not having this.
Right. Especially that scene where she's like talking about calling to Penelope, and Penelope's like, I need to go to sleep now because she doesn't want to hear it, and she just doesn't stop. In, like you said, even though she finds out, she's like, oh well, if I have to be the one to kind of nip this childish fantasy in the bud, then I'm happy to do that. And I just think it's so sad because she was such a good friend to her. It's just such a stab in the back. It's not like Penelope's just been looking on at Colin from a distance and they don't even know each other, and it's just like she's got a crush on him. They're actually really good friends and they know each other and they've grown up together. And so it's actually such a big betrayal because of that she uses their friendship to then like betrays her by still going for Colin regardless of knowing her feelings for him.
Yeah, I find it so sad. I so feel for Penelope because she just gets underestimated and pushed to the side the whole way through the season. I think that's partly why they did the reveal in season 1 to kind of give her a bit of power back, so the audience know actually she's not complete. Like the her friends and her family might underestimate her, but we shouldn't as an audience. We need to know that she's got power and she's going to use it.
Yeah, I love that. And I'm so grateful that it was, because then she was able to kind of sabotage the whole plan, the running off to Gretna Green, and she was able to stop that, which was good. I think I mean the Featheringtons, they do have it pretty rough. Like I know they're not the night like Mrs. Featherington, she isn't the nicest. Like she's very calculated and very obsessed with what people think of her and their family and everything, and pretty jealous of the Bridgertons. But I do feel bad for them because they really do get it tough. You know, obviously Mr. Featherington, he has a gambling issue and basically uses all of their money, including his daughter's dowries. So they're basically broke, and then he's obviously killed for it as well, because he goes and like dabbles in the wrong stuff with the wrong people, and next thing you know he's dead. So they have it pretty rough. I do feel for them, and they are kind of surrounded by a lot of scandal, and it feels like the Bridgertons seem to always avoid scandal. Like they're always close to it, and then they just like they manage to get away from it. So I can understand why a lot of the families hate them.
Yeah, I think that I don't know if it's because they're the main characters and that's kind of how she wanted to write them, but I think it's partly because they're so friendly. Everyone likes, even if they get jealous of them, there's nothing not to like. Like they're 8 very charming siblings with a very lovely mother. Obviously, he's like Viscount Lord Bridgerton. He's quite high up in the court. And I think they're friendly, and I think that Violet makes an effort, but she's not silly. She knows how to pull strings and to get people to do what she wants. Quite often in the books, she's like, oh, well, you have to have your banns read and wait a certain amount of time for the wedding, but I know the Archbishop, so you can get married next week. So she's got friends in high places and she knows how to play the game.
Yeah, I really love that the scene where when she's trying to get rid of Nigel so he can't marry Daphne, and she goes to the Queen, and then she gets that plan to kind of spread gossip about him having an illegitimate child amongst all the maids and everything, and she spreads that across like the whole of London, so that the Whistledown writes it, and then obviously he has to leave. I just think that was genius. I love that.
So clever. Like she knows how court works and how like the community works in the ton, and she's going to play it for hers and her children's advantages, but she's never mean. Like she wouldn't do it to anyone that doesn't deserve it, and she's just looking out for them. Like she doesn't victimize anyone that's genuinely a nice character. Like Nigel's horrible. So if she can get rid of him,
Is it not funny that there's always like some creepy guy who tries to propose and is like obsessed? Like literally, Nigel is literally a Mr. Collins. Like he just does not get the picture. The answer's no, Nigel, no, and he just keeps going. Honestly, how many times does that guy get beat up because he's literally will not stop?
I know, and it's all because Anthony like scares off everyone else. Do you know what? I cannot wait for season 2 because this is going to be Anthony's redemption arc because he's so horrible in season 1. I don't dislike him, but he's like
He's just
not
a
very
mess.
responsible. He's such a mess. That's the best description. Is he's just a mess. And in season 2, in season 2, I assume they'll cover it, but in book 2, you kind of find out more why he's a mess. Like he has a lot of trauma around his dad dying, so they go into that a lot, and you kind of see him like learn about who he is and who he wants to be, and he kind of steps up. And then in the rest of the books, he's like Lord Bridgerton, like controlling all his siblings. They're all like, "Oh, Anthony."
That's so funny. Yeah, I'm hoping that it's gonna. It kind of got me. He was so mopey. Like if he didn't get to sleep with what was her name, Serena, or what was her name? I forgot what her name is now. The opera singer. Yeah.
Sienna.
So if he didn't get to sleep with Sienna, the next day he'd be such a douchebag. Honestly, it drove me up the wall. I'm like, just go and sleep with Sienna so that you stop being a douchebag to everybody else. Because honestly, drove me up the wall. I did find it quite funny though when all the men were kind of coming around to see Daphne and he'd like turn up early or he'd just like make comments because he'd seen them like at the club or whatever prior. I did find it quite funny, but at the same time, can you imagine how annoying that would be? He's honestly awful, so bad. No wonder she ended up with one of his friends. That was the only man he wasn't like blocking. So
well, but the reason he didn't block Simon is because he thought Simon would never marry, and then they ended up being forced to marry because Anthony caught them in a compromising position, which happens in quite a few of the books. So it's quite like a nice way to get them paired up, which I find quite funny. I think it's like, oh yay, look what happens now. What I really like about this season is about these books is they do have the romance tropes. And I love a trope in romance. Like that's partly why romance is popular. Like they have obvious tropes that are done really well. So with Daphne and Simon, you kind of have fake dating and enemies to lovers because they pretend to be engaged to make Daphne seem interesting.
And friends to lovers, which is another one as well.
Yeah. So you get so many great things. And it's nice to kind of see. I mean, Austen used them, but they weren't really tropes then. She kind of pioneered some of those things. Obviously, those are things that would have happened in real life, but Austen kind of pioneered it. And I think Austen is a big fan of friends to lovers. You see a lot of those in her books. Like you have, well, I hate to say it, but like Fanny and Edmund, like they were friends first. Emma and Knightley, Jane and Bingley got out kind of as friends. Catherine, Mr. Tilney. So it's nice, like, that you do have that because Daphne and Simon do then become friends and do have a great friendship. And you have it in quite a lot of the other books, like Colin and Penelope is just my favourite.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I think as well, it's a good way to have that in because obviously in like Regency England, courting could have gone really fast if your sole purpose was just to marry. So it's really nice if they have friendships because it means we get to actually go on a longer journey with them. Because realistically, like people can have really short courtships and they can just be like sort of getting married or they can have arranged marriages. So I think the friendship side of it's a really good way for us to get to know the couple better, even if it's before they're like officially a couple.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that like Catherine and Tilney are a really good example because the whole way through, she doesn't think he has any interest in her at all. She just thinks that he's a kind person. And then he takes an interest because she's friends with his sister. But the whole time he's like, oh, actually, I think that from like the dance in Bath, he's got an interest. He's just not really sure what to do with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree.
I love Henry Tilney. I think he's great.
He's so sarcastic, isn't it? I swear to God,
So and he's so funny, and he just like takes the mick out of his sister and Catherine all the time. So
I just feel like he's Austen. Like I feel like he's Austen's narrative in a character. Like it's genuinely him. It's her voice.
He's great. I really, really like him. And there's not really like a villain in that one as such. in terms of
John Thorpe, I hate him.
Yes,
Oh,
but Catherine knows that from
the
like
get-go.
the time she meets him, whereas in some of the others they get dupes. Catherine is like, you're weird and you talk a lot of crap.
Yes, so true, you know. That's actually why I love Catherine, because she's literally just calls like a spade a spade. She's just like, you're weird, you're nice, I'm gonna stick with the nice people. Although she does kind of get duped by Isabella, because
Yes.
obviously she thinks Isabella's the friend, and then it obviously turns out Isabella's a fortune hunter and also sleeping around with people.
Yes, it's kind of like the reverse, isn't it, in that one, where the person that dupes her is not a romantic interest, it's a friendship. And it kind of teaches her about naivety and who you can trust.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in many ways that's worse, isn't it? Like we were saying about Marina and Penelope. I think sometimes the betrayal of a friend is worse than the betrayal of the lover. Like in a story, like when you're watching it, I think it hurts more because you're just like, ow, like, you know what I mean? It wasn't something that was necessarily ever like with some of the lovers. There's no saying that they'll necessarily work out, but with a friendship, you think it's going to last, and that person's someone that you can trust.
Yeah, and I
So
think Penelope actually is really hurt by that betrayal because the rest of her family are horrible to Marina. And she makes an effort from when Marina arrives, like trying to make her feel welcome. And then Marina just throws it back in her face.
yeah, I know. I think a really cool dynamic though, which is interesting, is between Marina and Mrs. Featherington. Like, even though I don't really like either of them, I really appreciate, well, not appreciate, but I really found interesting how like calculated they both were and how they could understand each other because they were both willing to do whatever it took to survive. And I
Yeah,
thought
like
that was
they actually
interesting.
have quite a lot in common that you wouldn't really expect when Marina first comes on the scene. You just think that she's going to be an extra character and Mrs. Featherington's not going to be very nice to her. And you can see why she's not that keen to have her there because she's got three of her own daughters to try and marry off. They're not very wealthy. The dowries aren't going to be great. And they've not got the same status as some of the other characters. Part of their in is being friends with the Bridgertons. So they don't really need another person to be like competing almost against her siblings, but it's also not her siblings, her children. But it's also a bit weird that they're all out at the same time.
Yes. And also, this is all before they realize they literally have no money. Like, they're basically living on nothing, but they don't know it because he doesn't tell them, like Mr. Featherington doesn't say to them. But you're right. Like, at least with like the Bridgerton family, obviously it's mostly of a lot of the brothers are out, but it's kind of different with men anyway. But Daphne's like the only out female. And so yeah, the sole focus can be on Daphne, and it is like that's Eloise makes that point all the time. She's like, well, mother's attention's constantly on you, and that is the case. Like, all of the effort goes into Daphne finding a match, whereas like you said, the Featheringtons, oh my gosh, can you imagine like having the Daphne situation 3 times over and then 4 because you've got a relative coming to stay with you?
Yeah, who you don't really want, and then she's not very grateful, and then you find out that not only is she stuck with you, she's also pregnant, so she could shame your entire family. And obviously, modern days, that judgment, obviously, I don't agree with at all. But for the era, it very much could have ruined them all. Like, you were ruined by association. If you one of your friends ran off with someone, look at what happens with Lydia. Lydia runs off to Brighton, and the chances are that the rest of the Bennets are ruined. I mean, Mr. Darcy saves the day and manages to semi-hush it up, but people still know. Like, Lady Catherine de Bourgh knows and says, are the shades of Pemberley to be thus polluted?
That's polluted.
So even though for a modern audience, we might watch it and be like, that's a bit harsh, like she's just pregnant. But actually, for the era, that has big ramifications. And she could like ruin the prospects of 3 other women.
I know, it's so true. And that's what I mean. Even though the Featheringtons aren't likable, apart from Penelope, it's I do feel bad for them because I just think they're dealt such a bad card all the time. Well, a bad card, that's really ironic considering their father gambles. But but you know what I mean? It's like one thing after another for them. And then he dies in the end, literally in the last episode, literally it's like right at the end, isn't it? But I am interested. And do you know what's really sad as well? I actually would have liked to know more about one of the sisters, because one of the sisters actually found like a love interest. It was really funny because they were really weird and really similar. And they were like talking about cheese. That was really funny.
Yeah, I think that you kind of see them in Penelope's book.
Oh, do
And I
you?
feel like I may have imagined this, but I feel like one of them marries Nigel.
What? Oh my God. Ew.
I feel like that happens. I kind of see them as like the ugly stepsisters from like the Disney Cinderella,
Yeah.
like the live action one, where, well, kind of the live action one, they've got that sort of vibe with the ugly clothes. And then I don't know if you ever watched the second Cinderella, where it's like three short stories. Yeah,
Yes.
and you see like is it Anastasia falls in love with the baker?
The baker, yeah.
Yeah, I just think that that kind of gives me the vibe of like Penelope's two sisters.
That's so true. Yeah, literally. And like Anastasia, where she's like, obviously she isn't that horrible when she's like on her own. That's a bit like the sister that starts being courted by the guy who likes cheese. Oh my gosh, it actually killed me when he was like, oh, that dress is like the same color as the cheese that we had at lunch from your mum. I was literally like, oh my God, no, what? That's so funny. I'll tell you one of my favorite scenes. Do you know when they're prepping for the duel in Anthony like grabs Benedict and pulls him into the office, and then they grab Colin and pull him in. They're just like, and they're obviously discussing how to sort things out and who's going to be the second and all of that lot. I actually love that scene between the three of them.
I love the dynamics between the three of them. I think they're great. And whenever you see that pop up in the books, for me, it was like a highlight. So in book 5, I think all of them, and maybe Gregory as well, the younger brother, turn up where Eloise is and like start like threatening her love interest. And it's so entertaining. It was like my favorite bit of the entire book. They all just rock up and they're like, right, we're not having this. Like, you're going to do this, blah, blah, blah. And I just think like their dynamic is so funny because Anthony's kind of like a dad to all of them because he's older, especially for the younger two, because obviously their father passed away. He's like the dad. So he's got that kind of dynamic. But with Colin and Benedict, because they're closer in age, he can't really tell them anything. They just kind of do whatever they want.
That's so funny. And then there's also Benedict and Eloise. That's a really nice sibling friendship as well. And I think they have an understanding of one another because they both feel trapped by society. So I like the scenes between them where they're like on the swings and they're like talking about it. I think that's a really good sibling friendship as well.
Yeah, I really like both of those characters. Like, I really like Eloise and I love her friendship with Penelope. They're very different and they have very different ideas, but they don't really seem to judge each other. So it's quite different to, like, for example, like Charlotte and Lizzie in Pride and Prejudice, because even though they are friends, you kind of imagine that if Lizzie had a better option, she wouldn't be friends with Charlotte. And that sounds really harsh, but they're in quite a small town. They have like limited people around and they are very different in mindset. And even though she goes to visit her, she says, doesn't she, that she knows that after like Charlotte's married, their friendship won't be the same, because I think it is partly through convenience. But you can see that Penelope and Eloise, like, they are different, but that doesn't matter.
And there's genuine friendship there. No, I totally agree. That's so true.
What I like about the first book is you do see some of married life, whereas nearly all of Austen's books end with the marriage, and then you don't really see anything after that. And I'm really excited because I just bought book 9, which isn't a proper story. It's like second epilogues to all of the books. So you like see them further on. So I've already read the Daphne and Simon one because it was on the end of my Kindle edition, and it's like them later on with their family, and it's really lovely. And apparently there's a bonus story about Violet, their mum, who I just think is great. She's
Agreed.
like Mrs. Bennet, but not as annoying.
Mrs. Bennet without nerves.
Yeah, and she's not pushing them to get married for any other reason than she was so happy with her husband and she wants them to be that happy. And I just think that's adorable.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. But yeah, I also agree. Like, it is interesting. I actually had this conversation because when I rewatched Bridgerton recently, I actually got my boyfriend to watch it with me. And I got him to watch the first episode. I thought, he's not going to stick this. And then he was like, oh, this is great. Yeah, let's keep watching. I was like, oh my gosh, this is proof Bridgerton is mainstream. He can stomach this. And then I heard him on the phone to work and I swear he said, let's make haste. I was like, oh my gosh, he's converted. But yeah, so I think it is great that we get to see further down the line, because I think all Austen fans what breaks our heart the most is we can't have more. Like, that's it. What we've got is what we've got. And obviously there is like a Jane Austen fan fiction, etc. But the reality is we'd all crave to hear what Austen would have written for the characters further on. That's probably the great thing about Bridgerton as well, because they've done a whole season on the first book. You can get into things in so much depth. Like, that's why I was saying we couldn't even do a summary, because how much happens in that first season. Like, how would I even summarize that? But yeah, I mean, I'm happy to wrap things up there. I mean, we've got a lot of seasons to come, so we'll probably move back doing one for each one. So
I'm really
stay
excited for season 2.
Yeah, so am I. I really can't wait. I think it's going to be really good. But where can people find you?
Oh, so I'm on Instagram with Martha Bethan Reads. I also have a blog, which has the same name, but I've been very bad at writing on it for a while. But there is Jane Austen articles on there. So if anyone is interested, I've got some like backdated ones that I wrote a little while ago. So that's like my 2 main platforms, but mostly Instagram.
I love that. No, that's great. Yeah, thanks everybody for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next episode.